All right, well, welcome everyone to the Grower Coach Garden Show. I'm Ken Salvail here today, and we're talking about gardening as we do each week. And today we're going to review a few things. We'll talk a little bit about planning for water conservation today, and we'll also talk about a few emails that we have, some questions and some information on lilacs and some long blooming favorites. And today we have a very special guest on the show here with me today. It's Donna Balzer. So welcome, Donna.
Hi, Ken. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you too. And yeah, it's been a little while since we chatted, and spring is springing out there.
Oh, for sure. Isn't it the truth? You go away one weekend and you come back and things are, well, especially the lawn.
Yeah. Oh, and the tomato plants, they seem to have just leaped.
I turned all my tomatoes a week ago and I just was busy. I was organizing a plant sale. I came back and I went, what happened? Some of them have like 2 branches veering off. Doesn't make any sense at all. I just did that, but it's spring.
Yeah, well, you're one of the lucky ones that has an actual greenhouse. And how nice is that?
Although I've heard a lot of people in Kelowna aren't that interested in greenhouses because it's so hot there already in the summer. But I got to tell you, when we put that shade cloth on, which we usually do the 1st of May, and we're a little off schedule here this year, it was cooler inside the greenhouse during the heat of summer than outside. So it's like sitting under a shady tree when you go into the greenhouse. It's nice.
Yeah, I love the shade cloth. And for us, yeah, the temperatures changed so rapidly. It seemed like this year we went from winter to a very short compressed spring, and now it's literally like almost summer.
I know. Are your lilacs in bloom there right now?
Full bloom. Yeah.
Full bloom, same here. So, you know, that's always my test of, in Calgary, the lilacs usually bloom very last week of May and into early June. So we're usually 2 to 3 weeks ahead of them, but usually Kelowna is about the same as us. So that's good to know.
Yeah, well, that was one of my topics I wanted to chat about today was the lilacs. Because there's so many different types. And I think when people think lilacs, they think the old fashioned Syringa vulgaris, and, they're just such a bulletproof plant, it seems like. But there's quite an arrangement and assortment of different sized plants and different blooming. Some are a little earlier, some are a little later. But I don't know if you have your favorites that you like.
You know, I love that Japanese tree lilac because I did some historical work at the Rita Rock Garden in Calgary, Alberta. Right. And those had been planted in 1922. And then that garden was abandoned for like 40 years between the mid-40s and the mid-70s. It was just sort of, nothing was happening, weeds, everything. But when I went in the early aughts, those trees were beautiful. They were taller than any book I had ever seen describe them. So usually they're described as being about 5 meters tall. They were definitely more like 10 meters tall. But think about it. They had been with no water, no spraying, no care, no pruning for, well, they've been in there now for over 100 years in that same spot. So they're just a really late blooming lilac. That's the Japanese tree lilac. Sometimes the nurseries sell them, and there's cultivars now as well, like ivory silk. But sometimes the nurseries sell them as multi-stemmed. So then they're like a really gorgeous cherry tree because the bark is so black. It's so pretty.
Yeah, I love that.
Lilac that way, though. You've probably seen it. You know these things, but it's just a white flower. So it's disappointing for people that are thinking, oh, French lilacs. It's not that, but it's the last blooming lilac, usually sometime in late June. Yeah,
it is. It's right in June, isn't it? And it's they're massive blooms on some of them.
Massive, and the fact that it had survived so long with so little care, I really liked that.
Yeah, they're slow. Yeah, they're slow growing, like a lot of lilacs are. Like, and that was always the thing. I know some people had said, "Oh, I really want to have a lilac because I had a lilac when I was a kid, and I'd really like to have one again." And they're starting out with a small one, and they always think, "Oh, it's got to be fast growing because it's so durable," but they can be really slow.
No, you're totally right. I got one called Purple Sensation in my Mother's Day bouquet my daughter sent to me, and I said, where did you get these flowers? Because that's just so unusual. She got them from a lady that's doing her own flowers in her own garden, which was neat. And she had that Purple Sensation, has that white edge with the purple on the middle. It's so pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are allergic to lilacs. I don't know if you know that. They give off a lot of volatile organic chemicals, which is VOCs, is what we call them. So putting them next to a window can be tricky because people that are allergic when they're sleeping at night, it really brings on the allergies. So there are a lot of VOCs in lilacs. So just buyer beware, don't put them near a window.
I wonder if that's what my issue is. I know that for you, I never had any allergies my whole life. And then just in the last 5 years, things have changed. And
Oh, yeah.
one of the things is I love the lilacs because, again, it reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to sit out. Our neighbors had this huge hedge of the old, regular old-fashioned lilacs, and they were so beautiful. And the fragrance would just waft in. And now every time I can't walk past a lilac without grabbing smelling it, but I don't, with all the antihistamines and things that we have, I don't react to it right away. But when the lilacs are blooming is definitely when my allergies kick in.
Well, I'm sad to hear that, Ken, because they are very hardy and pretty in landscapes. They're so nice.
Yeah, well, you might have solved the mystery, but I know the grasses are also one of those things that trigger a lot of allergies.
Sometimes it's just different things blooming at the same time. You're blaming the lilacs, but maybe it's a grass right beside it.
Yeah, or those pine trees. Oh my goodness.
Aren't they something?
They
and for years, sorry to cut you off there, but for years, there's a guy named Thomas Ogren who studies allergies. He said for years, the whole landscape industry has been pushing, you don't want those messy female trees, like green ash. Think about green ash. Yeah. So instead of putting in the messy female trees, by messy, he just means they produce seeds. Instead of that, they've gone to all male varieties. So with green ash, which is just one tree, they're almost all planted to males, and the males produce the pollen, which again causes allergies. So he said the rates of allergies in the cities of North America has gone skyrocketed because of this trend towards all male trees, which is so interesting.
Yeah, that really is. And it's true, because I often mention to tell people like, oh, pick this one because it doesn't have any seed pods. It's way less messy. And
that's what we've been saying since the 50s. But apparently Thomas's research has showed it's causing more allergies, especially, again, near your house. And of course, green ash are so commonly used as boulevard trees, so you can't help but drive past them. And so we have to go back to the messy trees.
Yeah.
Because those male trees are producing a lot of pollen, and that's
exactly. Well, there you go. Another mystery solved. That's fabulous. So just another lilac that I really like we're moving more and more to these dwarfer varieties. And of course there's that new one, what do they call it? Bloomerang.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I've grown some up, let's say to full fruition. I've grown them they've been in now, I think, for about 12 years.
Wow.
And so they're up to about maybe 8-9 feet tall, and I'm almost as wide. So they're not as small, like they kind of describe them on the tag as being this perfect little plant. But they're much bigger than what you think. But they certainly are almost ever blooming. They keep trying to bloom, and then they bloom once in the spring and then really strong again in the fall.
Yeah.
But
Isn't that an interesting plant? I love it too. But there was the little leaf lilac, which was before they came out with Bloomerang. There was that Syringa mayeri palaban, which is one we were growing, and it's almost exactly the same. I don't see a big difference between the Bloomerang and that. I think if it's cheaper, you don't have to buy the patented one. I think you can just
Do you find that one reblooms a bit though? Does it?
Yeah, it does. But I have to tell you, and mostly in the fall, like you say, I have to tell you that a lot of people mix up the Miss Kim lilac because it sounds like a small Japanese lady, Miss Kim. It's Miss. Mm-hmm. You're young when you're still a Miss, and the name Kim sort of sounds like small. But Miss Kim lilac is not the Bloomerang. It's not the little leaf lilac. It's sometimes 3, 5, 6 meters tall. It's quite a big, and it's got a longer leaf. And so just watch out for that. Even though it sounds small because of the label, they often say it's small. I find the Miss Kim is quite large. It's no good in your front yard. It's going to just hide your house and cover your pathways. And so I like the Bloomerang.
Yeah, it blooms differently too. Miss Kim you often see it with the leaves on it and the blooms sticking out of the leaves, whereas with some other plants, they'll bloom first and then leaf out second. And You know,
But
they're
if you're
both.
just at the nursery and you're looking at the name tags and it says a dwarf lilac, you might think, oh, Miss Kim, that sounds nice, but it's not. Don't buy
Yeah,
it.
and that brings up a whole nother discussion about the tags, is that they always fail to tell you, is this in 5 years? Is this in 10 years? Is this in 20 years? Is this in Edmonton? Is
Yeah.
this in Vancouver? Is this in Kelowna? Where is it, right? Because it always seems to me, I've been involved in developing a lot of nursery tags over the years.
Have
And
you?
so, yeah, just it's been sort of part of the program. And so we would always develop the tags and do the write-ups and everything for the plants. And then, but at first, I really started out giving the perfect plant picture. So
Oh,
what would be the perfect size and shape? Oh, this grows 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. It's perfect. And then as time went on, it really started to bother me that people were not giving that the time. You know, we always say that plants have 4 dimensions. You know, they have the regular 3 dimensions, but they also have time. And time
right.
is the 4th dimension that affects plants more than anything else. And then of course climate, you know, which is always a big factor, because if you live in Calgary, you know, how much is it going to grow in 5 years? Well, you never know, might not.
Yeah.
Might not make it. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. But the tag thing is something I always tell people, that, you know, if you find a good horticultural person, somebody to follow, that's maybe in your climate or in your area, and maybe bounce some ideas off them. And the other thing I always find is, if you can, like, say if you like lilacs and you want to buy a lilac, maybe do some driving around and look at some of the lilacs around. You'll get a better idea of how they are in your neighborhood, and
Mm-hmm.
just look at the house, you know, and if it's an older house, maybe from the 60s or 70s, you get an idea that that's probably an older plant. And yet, if it's a newer one, it just kind of give you a bit of an idea, maybe.
I made a huge mistake once. I installed some near a downspout in a yard and they just died.
Yeah,
They're used to being shelter belt trees. They want to be in droughty areas. They want to be out in a dry, windy zone. And, if they've got too much water sitting around the roots, they're not going to do good. So I think a lot of plants die from overcare. And I think when I was younger, I thought, oh, by the downspout, that's going to be the perfect spot, but not for lilacs. They prefer dry, exposed sites. And that's why they were used so commonly with shelter belts. But the other question I get, Ken, is I want that non-suckering variety of lilacs. People don't want the suckering lilacs.
yeah,
So then they get the ones that don't have the nice flavor. If you're thinking of smell and you're thinking of your childhood, you're probably thinking of the French lilacs, which were sort of coming from all across Eurasia. They weren't actually developed, they were sort of developed in France and improved and selected, but they aren't from France. They were coming from Eastern Asia and through Turkmenistan and places like this. And those French lilacs have the deepest purples. Like I said, the one sensation is purple and white. They have bright whites. They have, so many. Again, when I worked on the Rita Rock Garden, we had so many beautiful, like Madame Lemoine, which is a beautiful white. Like, it's been in that garden since the early 1920s. So there are some beautiful hardy ones. But the non-suckering ones, which were developed like the Preston lilacs, they were developed at the research station in Ottawa back in the 40s and 50s. And they got bland, kind of pinky beige color flowers. They're not smelling nice. You make a big compromise if you go for that.
yeah, and they're sure fast growing.
And they are.
Preston's just stand back. I know.
Yeah. But do you agree they're not as nice smelling? They don't smell as
you still get a little bit of that smell, but it's not. It's like a different animal altogether.
sure.
They're very bloomy. I find the whole branch almost flowers. So
Yeah.
they're pretty nice, like from a visual aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But there's
Not
just
those
nothing.
intense purples.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Charles Joly.
Oh, isn't that great?
That was the best one.
Oh.
And it's so fragrant. I don't know what it is about that deep, deep purple, but wow.
Must have been the original color, do you think? Because sometimes the original colors that haven't been bred are just stronger. And that Charles Joly, that is a beautiful dark purple. I love it.
And it's unfortunately it's mistagged a lot of times in nurseries. So what I always have to do is if I'm and I hate to say this out loud, but if I'm buying for myself, I like to see it in bloom when I buy it.
Yeah.
because
Oh,
there's
for sure.
human error happens, right? And people are putting tags on plants and away they go. And then you're making an investment like that. It's an investment in time.
Yeah.
A
It's not
plant
just
thing,
money.
it's a whole year, and then maybe on the second year, maybe it decides it's not going to bloom that year. So you get it for another year, and then when it finally blooms, it's a blue color or something that you didn't want. And but it's funny,
Yeah.
I the hibiscus rosa sinensis, or not rosa sinensis, but Syracuse, the rose of Sharon, is
Mm-hmm.
one that I really like. Diana, the pure white one, and
Mm-hmm.
and if you grow it in nice rich conditions, the leaves are deep dark green, and the flowers are sort of a semi double white, and it almost resembles, to me anyway, from a distance, it's suspiciously like a gardenia a little bit, and they can be hedged, and they're really quite colorful as long as you can keep the foliage dark green. And so when you're buying white ones and then they turn out to be double pink ones,
Mm.
and I actually bought I bought 4 of them, and only one of them turned out to be the white one.
Oh no.
And I was like, well, and I don't, I'm not that crazy about the double pink one. It's nice actually. Then I've moved them around now, and they're all fine, and it is quite showy. It's beautiful.
I have to say I see this problem with kiwis. I don't know if you grow kiwis there in Kelowna. You
Yep.
grow the fuzzy kiwis. They come in separate male plants and female plants. And the females have a big showy flower. And the males don't. They have a less conspicuous. But you have to buy one of each or you're not going to get kiwis. And so often you end up with 3 females and no male. You only need 1 male. You can have up to 5 females. But it's so frustrating. Again, just mislabeling.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've got a few connections who do a lot with kiwis, and what they're doing now is they buy all females and they make sure they're all females, and then they buy 1 male and they use it as a grafting material, and they graft,
Oh,
and so they get the male and female on both plants. So, and
well, that's better.
yeah, that's
Because, yeah, the labeling, I mean, you're right. Whether it's lilacs or kiwis, if you need a male and a female, you need both of them. So
exactly. Well, that's awesome. So yeah, we're talking about plants now, and then one of the topics I wanted to make sure we touched on, because there's so many cool things. Like, it's spring, right?
yeah, so much is happening.
Yeah, try to pick a plant of the week. That's the thing I do. I look out my window and I just go, wow, I can't even choose. There's so many things in bloom. So, but spring is one thing, but as you start moving into summer, there's always these plants that just seem to keep on blooming and blooming and blooming, and they're hardy perennials, so you don't have to be replacing them every year. And I am finding some of these proven winter ones and these more hybridized plants are really, really performing incredibly well. And so I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about a few long blooming perennials that we both like. That'd be kind of cool. And I can start with a couple. In the Okanagan here, we're picking a lot of these plants that are sort of more a little bit drier, hotter climate plants, and they really perform well. And we're finding that the new echinaceas, we have a lot of different types of echinaceas now. We used to be able to just go get the white and then a variation of pink, but now, of course, they've crossed all the different pallidas and angustifolias and all the different types of echinaceas. And now they've come out with this really wide scope of colors and whatnot. But the one thing we've found is that once they start blooming, they don't stop.
Mm-hmm.
Going and going and going. And so you wait a little bit for them to start blooming, but once they get going into June, they start to flower earlier than the old-fashioned echinaceas. But wow, in September, you're still deadheading and you're still getting shows. It's just fabulous. So I think that's a big win for the gardeners, to get those new varieties of echinacea.
I haven't had that much luck with echinacea. Interesting. I know you have to be disciplined. All the labels say this: take off the flowers in the first year, because when a gardener comes home with a plant, they usually buy it because it has the flower and they want to keep it. And it's hard to be disciplined to take off those flowers because you just want them. And maybe that's my problem. I never take off the flowers. So I haven't had a really good show for my echinaceas.
Yeah. So I think it can be a heat factor too, is depending where you live, and you're located in
I'm on Vancouver Island, so it's a bit cooler. We've got that maritime influence. A lady came to me this weekend and said, tell me, what zone are we in? And I said, well, where do you live within our area? And she lives close to the water. And I said, that's not really a zone. That's a maritime climate. So a maritime climate, just to clear that up, is not split up in zones the same way because they're always getting cool air. So they might get intensely bright light, but they're getting that cool wind all the time. And that maritime climate. So within the first sort of maybe 100 meters of being near the ocean, you're getting that maritime climate. And it's going to be cold almost all year. So they don't grow the way people grow. Just even in Port Alberni, which is in the middle of the island, they were up to 45 degrees last week. That's more of a Kelowna inland kind of climate. And that's quite different from the maritime climate. So there's quite a range. So I found I'm borderline on this maritime climate, and it can be quite cool here quite a bit of the time. So even though we think, oh, it's so mild on Vancouver Island, it's mild, it means you don't get the frost because that wind is always blowing. But it's dipping low, maybe 5 degrees at night, but it's not. It's
got humidity, right? You've got
cooler. So I was going to say one of my favorite long blooming perennials is the rudbeckia, and I love the prairie sun. Have you ever grown the prairie sun?
No, I haven't.
It's a yellow flower like many rudbeckias, but instead of being a brown-eyed Susan, it's got a green eye. So the center part of it is green. So it just looks beautiful with that bright yellow and that really nice chartreuse green. The two colors together on those flowers, and they bloom for a long season. They're often sold as annuals because they bloom so readily right away, but they can keep blooming all summer, and I really like them. And I've discovered, I don't know if this is a problem for you, I've discovered they're super hairy. The leaves are super hairy, and the deer do not like them in my garden. Now, deer are so crazy. They could like them and not like them in mine and like them across the street, but I've been growing different kinds. And that's the one now that I'm sticking to because I have neighbors draw. In fact, I had a florist last year. It was late August. A lot of things had gone, already drying off for the year. She drove by, stopped her car, knocked on the door. She said, I was just at the florist wholesale. I'm getting ready for a wedding this weekend. I can't find any yellow flowers. She needed them as a contrast for some of her roses and dahlias and things that she was using. So she asked if she could pick my rudbeckias. I said, and I have several kinds. And so I said, sure, go ahead. She tried to give me $10. I'm like, no, just tell the bride good luck and best wishes. And but they do continue to bloom for me. So I'm really liking the rudbeckias. I've been on a lot of the garden writers conferences, and we almost always do those in September all across North America. And the one common denominator is always rudbeckia. Somebody always has rudbeckia in bloom, and different kinds. And they do come in. Some of them have a much more brown center. Some of them have a variegated sort of looking flower. But I love the prairie sun. It's a really nice one. Easy from seed. You can order it from most of the seed suppliers as seed and then just grow it.
Nice. We found the same, that they are definitely deer resistant.
Good.
So the gold sturm, which is for us is more reliable, because these ones, some of these, like the fuzzier ones, they're, like you say, they're sold sometimes as an annual. We do find they sometimes die out over winter, but the Rudbeckia gold sturm is good, but the deer do eat it when they're hungry. If they don't have
the babies taste everything. I have alliums, which deer are not supposed to like. All of the beautiful purple sensation alliums, which are just blooming now. I love them. Short-term bloom, but love them. The deer have been eating off the flower heads just to taste them, and those are the babies. Like, they're like, oh no, we don't like that, so they don't eat the rest of the plant. Anyway,
we found the same with chives, that the fawns would eat the chives, or they would
the flowers.
No, they would shear the whole thing down, but they were very little, and we actually one of our clients was at her property, and she was watching them, and she was fascinated because she's quite the plant expert herself, and she thought she would never see that. And then, but it was just the fawns, and probably the last time that fawn will ever eat them, because they do learn. That's how they learn, is by trying things, I guess.
In fact, I have that Trudeau rose. What is that? Sasha Trudeau? It came out just after he died in that rock slide. And for years, it just looks like a Hansa rose. There's nothing spectacular about it. But I thought, oh, it's not that special. Sorry to say it wasn't that special to me. It's just a pink rose. So I put it in the front yard, and usually deer, when they see roses, they just love them. But they're so intensely thorny that actually that's been a good one for me for deer as well.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I have another plant that's a really good long bloomer that I really like, and I'm not sure how it performs in cooler climates. And that's one of the things why I think with like echinaceas perform really well here, but maybe not in the cooler climate. But with the asters, the Aster fricardi, which is there's one called Munch or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And that one is also good, but the Aster in general, from my standpoint, is in at least in this hot climate, is we get such a long bloom out of it, and it doesn't start till about mid-July, but once it goes right till frost. So we're good right till like November. It's unbelievable, and it's just a ball of blue, about 36, maybe even 4 feet across, 36 inches or so by about 30 inches tall. A blue ball with little yellow centers.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. So it's particularly the fricardi that you like?
Yeah, it's the only one it's actually called the summer aster because it starts so early, but it's got fuzzy leaves as well. So it makes it drought tolerant. And it also, the deer are not crazy about it. Like the little ones, the fawns will nibble on them from time to time. But again, I don't know if it's a texture thing or what it is, but they don't seem to like it that much.
I do have a nice aster that's in my deer zone. I have an area outside my fence. I just call it my deer zone. And it's more of a fall aster, but they do nibble it back so it doesn't bloom till later. But, a partner for that, and we saw this at the Kew Botanical Garden in England. And honestly, I've been using it for years, so it's no surprise to me. But when we saw it at Kew, my husband went up to the sign, wrote a note, came over to me and said, Donna, we should grow this in our garden. And I said, Keith, we do grow this in our garden. And that plant is Sedum Autumn Joy, also brilliant as a newer variety. It starts blooming in sometimes early August, and it will continue until frost. And we were in Kew, I think it was end of September when we were in Kew, and he was just amazed by it. The truth is, in a home garden, you don't grow 500 in one patch. You grow maybe a clump of 3 or 7, and he had never noticed it in our garden. And I said, we grow this, and it grows everywhere. But it isn't deer proof. The deer love it. It's just like and again, it's beautiful succulent plant, so it's great for dry areas. Beautiful, beautiful flower, long blooming, but mostly towards the latter half of the summer. So it's a showy one. And both the cultivar, Elsie's Gold. Have you seen Elsie's Gold?
No, I haven't.
It's I bought one when I was in Holland. I was touring some wholesale nurseries in Holland, I would guess about 15 years ago. And there's one called Lagos. It's a sedum, but it's called Lagos, Lagos. Unbelievable, beautiful yellow edge to the leaves with a green center. It's just, right now it looks like a perfect ball. So even though it's not in bloom yet, it's so beautiful all summer long, because right now it's already a big, like 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter clump. So I love Lagos, but I bought it originally at, Superstore. I saw it at Superstore. I'd seen it in Holland, so I knew it was one I loved because I'd seen it in the fields there, bought it at Superstore, never seen it again. But 2 years ago, I saw the one called Elsie's Gold, which I think somebody took a cutting of Lagos, maybe, I'm not sure. And it's exactly the same. So Elsie's Gold or Lagos, both of them are sedums. Both of them look like they're in bloom, but they really just don't even have a very showy bloom. But the plant is just beautiful. It grows so uniformly, makes such a beautiful mound, is so drought tolerant. I would recommend that to everyone.
That's fabulous. These plants we come across, and when you see it, something just clicks, for people who are aware of plants. And I like the Sedum Autumn Joy too, and especially when there's no deer around. But when planting with the asters, particularly nice combination.
Oh yeah, that's why it made me think of it when you said the aster. I'm going to look for that summer aster. I don't think I've grown it.
It's funny because it's one of those plants that if more people were aware of it, and I talk about it all the time and I use it all the time, but I find it very difficult to find the plants. So when I go to a garden center and I go, oh, you've got Aster fricardi, I have little 4-inch pots. So I just buy the whole flat, and the way I go, good. That'll last me for a little while. But because I do that in every garden center I go to, there's not a lot for the public that's left.
Ken, you got to give other people a chance.
I know I'm hogging them. I even drive to all the surrounding cities and steal theirs as well. But it's just one of these things. And I also like to grow a bigger plant. I don't, small plants are okay, but I like to have a nice fat plant. So I'll buy them in those 4-inch pots and pot them up maybe into 2-gallon pots and grow them on until the summer, and then we use them in
landscapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those little 4-inch pots just dry out and blow away, don't they? They're just like so much tumbleweed when you get those little pots. They just can't take it. But that reminds me, can we talk about flood trays?
Yes, absolutely.
So, as you know, I've started growing things in the root pouches.
Right. Yeah, we should talk more about that.
Yeah, I copied that idea from a farmer in Saskatchewan because he's 6'6". He didn't want to bend over to pick all those strawberries. So instead, he said to me, I just grow them in a flood tray. And I said, now what is that? Well, it's just any, saucer or dish. But now some of the garden centers are selling them. They're long and maybe different widths, but maybe the width of a flat, the length of a flat wide, so that you can put several trays. And it really helps gardeners, because if you're going to just have plants that you're hanging on to that you want to plant later, you can't hang on to those individual pots, but you can put them in a flood tray, water the tray, they can absorb the water from the bottom as they need them. But I've been using them for my root pouches, and I asked you if we could talk about this because I love them. Yeah. This is one of the 5-gallon root pouches, so they're called fabric bags, but they're not actually fabric. They're made out of recycled water bottles, so it's like upcycling. And so I'm going to a farm to food conference this weekend. Well, not weekend, I'm going today actually. And so I potted this one up with green onions and kale and even strawberries and a miniature little, this is the tiny Tim tomato, because you don't want something that's going to get huge. It's only a 5-gallon pot. I know in Canada we say number 5, we don't say 5-gallon. But I found that these root pouches, because they can absorb moisture from the bottom, are beautiful in flood trays. And as the roots get to the edge of the pot, when you buy plants, you see them all spiraling around these plastic pots. This does not happen. They get to the edge of the pot, the root dies, which sounds tragic, but in fact, it just dies on the edge and then it roots back. So you get such a dense rooting system. And you'll find that many of the nurseries have been using these now because it produces a better root than if you just get that plastic pot with that spiraling. So I think I'm interested in this, and I think it's a great way to grow food. Again, I got the idea from Dean. It wasn't my idea. He's in Lindbergh, Saskatchewan, but he started growing strawberries that way. And when they're in the root pouches, they're always clean and dry. They're never laying on the ground. Your berries are never getting nibbled by bugs. They're just beautiful. And I've now branched out where I'm growing, like I said, miniature tomatoes, a few green onions, kale, just some things that, and the flood trays make it easy for me because I don't have to go out and water every little plant every day. Just fill up the flood tray, walk away, and they absorb and use the moisture that way. And I love that system.
Sounds great.
Just wanted to share it.
Yeah, we need to have things that make it a little easier. And we find in the heat of the Okanagan that if we're not watering, sometimes a planter you have to water 3 times a day.
I know.
It just dries right out. But if you use this flood tray technique, that might be something that would be helpful to extend the period of time the plant can survive.
Yeah.
That constant attention.
Now, my husband went ahead and built me some deeper flood trays. He just built a wooden trough, basically, and you could buy those metal troughs, but he lined it with plastic. He drilled a hole in the side near the bottom, about 1 inch from the bottom, and he put a little piece of garden hose in it, and he put a wine cork on the end. And I know in Kelowna, you know all about wine corks. Yeah. Just put the wine cork at the end. So when it rains, which we did have a small rain yesterday, that water will stay and hang on. And sometimes if I'm going away for the weekend, I will fill those deeper flood trays because, again, the root pouches, root bags, will breathe, so the roots aren't going to drown the way they would underwater. Right. And I could leave it 2 and 3 days with water filled up. But if it rains too much, I could just take the cork off and that little piece of garden hose lets it drain. And so I don't have to worry about it stagnant water, because nobody wants stagnant water and mosquitoes. That's not a good combination. So it just gives me a little bit of it's a little bit deeper. And we always call him helpful husband because he's always coming up with some new design idea. And that's been good for us. We've really used the combination of just the saucers or the purchased flood trays or the helpful husband mentioned, which is a bit deeper, and it allows me to grow my strawberries. We already have quite a few strawberries coming on, so it's been really, really tremendous.
Yeah, and I know we were chatting before the show. We were talking about the strawberries and how the pollination things, even though many of them are self-pollinating, they still require something to go in there and to make the connection.
Right, they easily need a gopher or a rat or something to run by, and some kind of disturbance, a wind, the gardener itself with a paintbrush, or I've discovered through extra research, because all of mine in my greenhouse have been pollinated, and just something small like a beetle that's walking through can disturb or sort of make the pollen fall off. And then I've been getting some really beautiful berries already. So strawberries are easy to pollinate, and normally outdoors it's just the wind and the bees and the various people walking by brushing them. But in the greenhouse, I've been finding I've got really good pollination too. So it's a combination of events with the strawberries, and not to worry, you can grow them both inside and out. So I think that's lots of fun. And it's super nice to have early strawberries.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I remember years ago, we used to sell all the different types of strawberries, but when they were really tiny, we used to, when they were first planted, we'd say, you know, pinch off all the flowers until the 1st of June. And then on the 1st of June, let them go. Like TriStar was one of our favorites, and it would produce.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, we would get about 5 pounds of strawberries per plant on the first season.
Yeah.
By doing that technique, by pinching the flowers off, because what it would do, I guess, is push more rooting, you know, and allow the thing to get established. On the second year, they're fine. Like they just fruit freely, and they're never quite as good. That type of plant, I think, is very, when it's vigorous, it's happy. And it's anything you can do to keep it vigorous. And as it ages, it loses that vigor a bit. So you have to pick some, you know, the little babies off of it and restart them again. And
well, what I've discovered this year, because I was pricing out strawberries, the TriStars to buy at a wholesale level are twice as much money as all the other varieties. And it's because they don't sucker. And people get confused with the suckers. They're like, oh, what to do with all those little sprouts? But the TriStars don't sucker. So you have to be really rigorous, so they just kind of double up within the plant, so then they get overgrown quickly.
So they have to divide them literally.
They have to go in and divide them up, and that's the only difficulty. Some people don't know how to handle the TriStars, whereas the other ones are sprouting and things are happening, and the people can easily root those little babies. In fact, I did a little video about strawberries, and that's on my YouTube channel. I don't know if you've had a chance to check that. There's so many things to do in life, but
yeah. Well, we should talk about that. And also with these, with the soil bags and whatnot, do you sell those on your website as well? Or?
I do. So it's just donnabalzer.com. So that's just the regular spelling on Donna, DonnaBalzer.com. You can look at some of the articles I've written about strawberry pollination. You can look at the root pouches and how I've used them, and some of the flood trays. It's fun. Great. I have them there too.
On YouTube, is it just Donna Balzer at YouTube, or?
Helping Gardeners Grow. Donna Balzer, Helping Gardeners Grow, because I had some old, you know how it gets. They almost multiply themselves, these YouTube channels. I don't know how they do it. You go away at night, you come back the next morning, you have 2 channels. So I don't quite know how that works, but if you go to Donna Balzer, Helping Gardeners Grow, you're going to get my YouTube channel with all of my little jobs in the garden, which I made last summer. I've also got some other things up there. As things occur to me as being interesting. We talked about potatoes last time, and I just got crazy, happy, excited about potatoes. So when things interest me, I pop them onto that Donna Balzer Helping Gardeners Grow channel.
Well, that's very cool. Yeah, I got all my potatoes are chitted now, and we're planting them out, and it worked exactly the way you said it would.
Oh, good. Now hold a few back once you've chitted them, if you're doing that, because see how far you can stretch it, because then you can stretch that whole harvest and see how far we can go in Kelowna and how late you can plant them.
Yeah, we've managed to plant quite a few different ones, but as you were saying about the determinate and indeterminate varieties, that the determinate ones are going to just produce right away and produce their crop, and then that's it. And I've noticed that some varieties, they just quit on you, and it's like, well, I'm healing them up, but they're not producing. And other ones just keep going and going, and you keep hilling them, and they can steal potatoes. You know, but we were able to do about 4 crops last year, and we started really early. We got our first ones in at the end of March last year, which was really early. and they were fine. They came up great. And then once they were about probably maybe 6 to 8 inches high, we put in another row. And
Mhm.
then we waited again till those ones were about 6 inches high. We did another row.
Wow, you're so organized. So how much land do you have, Ken?
Well, it's just raised beds. We've got 7 raised beds that are quite nice. They're fair size. They're at least 4 by 8. But then we also have an area that's in ground, for root crops and for glads. We love the glads, so we always put in a bunch
Yeah.
of those just for cuts. And then we stagger the glads too, so that we get them coming on.
You ever
This,
do an open house at your garden, Ken? That would be fun to come and see. Now
yeah,
she opens a can of worms.
yeah. Don't give anybody any ideas. I know we've been approached by the garden tour people and the master gardeners as well. Oh, we want to come and see your garden, your garden. And I'm always saying, well, it's just strictly for experimental use.
Yeah.
Not
No, I
really.
feel the same way. I don't have much of a show garden. And yet you invite people in and then they say to you, well, I'm seeing some weeds. And you're like, yes, it's a working garden. It's not a show garden. It's a working
No.
garden. And
And
we're
it's
all about
beneficial.
production.
Yeah, weeds are great because it attracts all the beneficial insects and organisms. I think it's one of the things that I think we all need to relax a little bit about
I
weeds.
think so too.
Let it go. It's all great. And, always remember that when you go into the garden, you go into the garden to find weeds, you'll find weeds. If you go into the garden to find flowers, you'll find flowers. Your
Exactly.
choice.
I should mention I've got this lettuce that's the size of my head right now. It's
Oh, yeah.
crazy. And I, like you with your potatoes, I started it early in March outside
Yeah.
just to see. And because we have so many deer outside, I covered it with the rime, the fleece. It's also called agricamon. And those heads of lettuce are huge. And now I'm like giving them, everybody that walks by, it's like, hey, you want some lettuce? And so it's been, because I know lettuce doesn't do well into the heat of summer. I'll be starting later types like romaines, but I won't. The butterhead lettuce is sort of a spring deliciousness with your asparagus. It's sort of that time of year when those things are ready and early. But it's sure exciting right now, isn't it, Ken? We both love gardening.
Oh, yeah. When it explodes, like you say, when the heat comes on, it's just amazing how a lettuce will go from being beautiful to being useless. And the
Yeah.
flower will come up and you just missed it, and that's why it's so nice of you to just give them away and let somebody enjoy them. You
Yeah.
just can't eat them fast enough. And one of the issues we have is we have a difficult time growing cilantro.
Oh, yes.
Fast as we get it in the ground, it bolts. And
Yeah,
we
no,
buy
I
this.
would never buy it as a plant. That's the first thing, right?
Well, we grow by seed, but what we would do is say we'd seed a bunch of, say, 6-packs. And
Yeah.
then when we're ready to plant those out, we'd go out and plant them, but we have to be no later than maybe the middle of March.
Yeah.
This gets too hot too fast, right? So we put them in, and then as we're planting them, we sprinkle a few seeds in with them.
Smart.
It's going to be slow germination. It won't germinate till we're towards the end of April, and then they'll start to germinate. And then but even by then, they're already starting to bolt. And we buy the slow bolting varieties, and they all bolt. And I always thought, gee, it must be much easier to grow any of the coriandrum family down at the coast.
Yes, very easy to grow here. Although I had a lady come through on a little unplanned tour yesterday, and she saw my cilantro, which is in a huge patch because I have it in several areas. Like you, I let it reseed because I think the secret is the reseeding. Then it comes up when it's ready. So I find it comes up really heavily in sort of late February, early March. Even though this year the ground was frozen solid, then it was just poking up here and there.
Right.
And then there's a big bunch of it coming up now, so from later. And then it'll reseed itself, so it'll start to come up again in September. So, it's not when you want it. When you have your avocado from the store ripe and ready to mix it for Mexican food, that is never when it's ready.
Yeah.
In good news, I talked to a chef in Calgary, and he was all about using the green seeds, not the brown ones, but the green seeds, throwing them in your freezer when they're ready, because they have exactly the same taste as the mature leaves.
Oh,
And
really?
they're quite nice, and you can crush them with your mortar and pestle and use them with salmon or whatever you're serving for supper. And it's sort of your little backup plan. So if you're Cilantro has gone to seed. It's not all bad news. You can save those green seeds. And that's Andrew Hewson. He's the instructor at the State Polytechnic in Calgary. And he saved my bacon on that one. But I found since being on the coast, it is a lot easier because we have those that maritime climate is what you need for cilantro.
Yeah.
And again, that's why it's probably good in a shade house, a house that you've shaded over a greenhouse, because you can keep that climate very stable, never too hot, never too cool, nice and moist. And that's what cilantro wants.
I think that's what I need to do, is build a special little miniature cilantro greenhouse. Started on.
It never ends. It never ends.
Oh yeah, March 1st, be out there and then keep it all contained and let it self-seed and do its thing.
Yeah, it's really fantastic when you can get it just right. So I've been lucky here, and it is the first time I've had really reliable cilantro. And it makes you kind of cocky. It's like, oh, easy to grow. But no, it's that maritime climate that's so fantastic for cilantro.
Yeah, well, that's awesome.
And being disciplined and letting it go to seed, picking some of the seeds, but not all of them. Because some people, again, are these neat and tidy gardeners, and they get in there and they clean out all those seeds, and then you don't have anything coming.
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's another question. We actually had somebody send us an email, and they were asking about their, every year the zucchinis and the cucurbits get the powdery mildew, and I don't know how bad it is in coastal regions, but out here it's just a given. And with my experience in pest and disease management, was always understanding about the temperatures that have to be just right for mildew to grow. And when I think here in the Okanagan, we have these long periods where it's right between that 18 to 25 degrees Celsius, which seems to be the time when those spores just love it. And we'll get those periods where it's like that round the clock. And that's when we see that the diseases really explode. But what we often mention to people with mildew is to use the baking soda and water treatment and just pre-apply it right away out of the gate in the spring. And every time you go to the garden, you always have your little spritzer there and just keep spritzing them. And as long as you're keeping a little bit of that on the surface of the leaves, it does work. It actually works. But
I think that's great for roses, because roses have some of the same leaves all the time. But I'm thinking, Ken, that the zucchinis grow too fast. Like, those leaves are massive.
You got to spray almost every day. Yeah, you have to spray.
So it can become a huge job. So I have to tell you, I've read the Steve Solomon book. Have you read that, The Intelligent Gardener?
Oh yeah, I haven't read it all.
So Steve says it's a problem with balance between phosphorus and zinc.
Oh, nice.
So if you do a soil test, here's just a complete soil test, an example of that. When you do your soil test, which most people would do, just geeks like me and you maybe, but if you find you've been adding too much bone meal, that'll throw the ratio off, because you need 10 times phosphorus to zinc. So if you've got the perfect amount of zinc, but you keep adding bone meal, you're going to end up where it's too far apart. You need 10 times phosphorus to zinc.
Yeah.
So the solution that Steve has suggested is just to go through your garden probably about a week before you expect to get powdery mildew. So this is probably late July. So we'll talk about it again in late July.
Yeah.
Mixing a tablespoon of zinc sulfate, which you can just get from the drugstore. You don't have to buy it at a garden center. It's just available. I just went and asked for it because they sell it in pills, because people take it when they're getting a cold coming on, because it's kind of an antiviral thing, which is kind of funny. So I've taken it. So I knew it was for sale at the drugstore. I asked for it in bulk. You can buy just instead of in the pills.
And
got the druggist to order it.
It's food grade too, which is so
food grade. Mixed it with water. And you just water it on either the soil, or in fact with the zucchinis, it's better to spray it on. So mix it with water in a little mister bottle, spray it on the leaves. You can get a month or more out of that without powdery mildew. And I've tried it here in my garden, and it seems to really help. Now I'm really focusing on not adding too much phosphorus, because you do it accidentally. You think, oh yeah, I think it's good to add bone meal. Maybe I should add bone meal. But you're just constantly adding that and not upgrading your zinc at the same time. So Steve says, and if people need the name of that book, I'll just repeat it again. It's The Intelligent Gardener with Steve Solomon. And it's about a 6 or 7 year old book now, but there's so much new information for people that aren't used to balancing their nutrients within the soil. It's published here in Canada by New Society Press. It's about $20. It's available at most of the libraries. And I think if someone's interested and they want to dig in, read that book about the balancing of nutrients. If you're not interested, just remember later in the summer, write it down in your journal. As you know, I have a journal. I write everything down in my journal and keep track. When did I get powdery mildew last week? And a week before that, spray the plants, just not spray like with a chemical, but spray with a mixture of zinc sulfate and water, about a tablespoon per gallon of water. And that can be a preventative if your soil is in fact low and has a
Low
raw
in zinc. And that's interesting that you mentioned that, because in the Okanagan, we have way too much phosphorus. Like our phosphorus levels are right off the scale. Like it's so high, and now it's not always available because our soils are so alkaline. Like we suffer the exact opposite to the coastal people who have acid soils. But it's interesting that we found through leaf analysis, because we deal with a few orchards here and there, and we would do tissue analysis and find out what the problem is, because we have this issue in the Okanagan where the trees just turn yellow, and immediately people say, oh, it's got to be iron deficiency or whatever. And we have a little bit of that because we have such alkaline soil. So the iron is a solid in our soils. It's not a liquid. So we can acidify and that sort of thing that really helps. But it's the zinc balance. It's ion antagonism, right? You might, probably know that term, is that certain nutrients, if the plant will just naturally take up the one that's in the highest quantity. Right? And it happens a lot with magnesium and calcium. And we have tremendous issues with that here, because we have extremely high levels of both magnesium and calcium.
Wow.
But our soils are so alkaline that sometimes neither of them are available. It's a frustration. You get your soil sample done, you get your test done, and you look at it and you go like, oh my God, I've got 3,500 times more than I need, but yet I have a magnesium deficiency. But that's all because of this ion antagonism issue. Just like you said, with phosphorus, you want to have 10 times more phosphorus than zinc, but you don't want to have 100 times.
Yes. And so your person who wrote you, who was that? I forget her name already. Oh, Terry from Armstrong.
Yep.
That's why Steve says, and we're saying, I think here, mist it onto the plants. Do it early in the morning. The plants can take it in through the leaves. People don't realize that plants can be fed through their leaves. They think it has to all be through the roots. But because there's so much action going on in, like, with all the different minerals fighting for space, and it's like a property, it's like Florida in the winter. It's just so many people so many minerals are there. So bypass all of that and just go right to the leaves. Do you ever spray fertilizers on the leaves? I'm just curious, like out in orchards, do you do that as well?
Yeah, foliar feeding is a normal part of the process. And we talk a lot about it here because of our soils being so alkaline that everything
makes it available to the plant.
Yeah, you just bypass the roots and go straight through the foliage.
Yeah, so I'm glad to hear you do that. I'd love to talk about, you know what, I'm so interested in this. I am so interested. I would love to do a whole show with you on nutrients, because I find it so fascinating. And right now, when we're at the beginning of the season and everything's growing so well and we're not having any heat stress, it seems everything's perfect. But pretty soon we're going to be into that stressful zone. So let's talk about that sometime, Ken.
Oh yeah, the next one will be the blossom end rot, right? It'll be coming on.
But again, it's available in the soil often. Like you said, you've got such high stuff, but
it's not available to the plant. Yeah, so we use the calcium. We buy food grade calcium and apply it directly onto the tomatoes when they're small, and we keep reapplying it. And
you spray it onto the leaves, or
cover the whole plant, top to bottom.
Just let it drench. So it's a full drench. You know, I love it. This is exactly what I'm doing too. We're from the same crib almost. We have the same. But it's interesting. It's interesting that it's still new for some people, and we want to share it. I think, my motto is helping gardeners grow and beginners blossom, and it's just, I want everybody to be successful, because there's nothing worse than having a frustrating time in your garden. You want it to be fun. You want it to be successful.
And that's how you get gardeners, right? Is you give them that close as you can to 100% success, and they'll never go back. They once they get that bug, then they're in.
And then they start telling us how to garden, which is fine.
Which is awesome. Yeah, well, it's great. And there's so much to learn. Well, we're coming down to the end of the show, so I want you to just mention your website one more time.
Okay. It's donnabalzer.com. I don't know if you want to include that in your show notes as well. Donna is DonnaBalzer.com. And I'd love to have people join along. I send out a newsletter once a month. And if you sign up for that, you'll get the newsletter, but you'll also get my 8 organic growing tips. So that's helpful for people.
That is fabulous. Well, thanks very much, Donna, for being with us today. This is so much fun, and I really want to do it again soon. It's so nice to have that back and forth and the chit chat about all the plant stuff. It's just so great. And
Okay, thank you, Ken. I love the opportunity.
All right, thanks, Donna.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks very much for tuning in today. It's been a fun show. It's great having Donna on board. Definitely check out donnabalzer.com and check out all the cool stuff she has at her store. It's really cool. And so that's it for today, and we'll see you again next week with more Grower Coach Garden Show.